The learning should be a zechus for the neshama of Moshe ben Ezra, the neshama should have an aliyah.
Amen.
We are in Parshas Eikev, pasuk, page Shin Tes Zion, which is 316.
Wow.
And if I can borrow this for a second, a fascinating discussion by the Zera Shimshon, a question that most people have never really considered. Why does God choose the Jewish people? Why did He pick us? So you can, what? Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is what you want to say, except the pasuk says something a little different. In the parsha we just read,
Well, I thought he went to the other nations and they said no.
well,
No, could have been
He
the other.
went to the other nations and they said no.
well, we'll see.
Could have been our cousin.
Okay, so it's based on the pasuk in this week's parsha, which begins with Kisomar Bilvavcha. You might say to yourself, I'm still not in the Zera Shimshon, I'm still in the pasuk. You'll say to yourself, Rabim Hagayim Ha'ela, these nations, there's so many. Echacha Ucha Lo Harisham. How could we possibly conquer them? You think about it, there's so many enemies, how could we possibly defeat them? And this isn't a question that Moshe Rabbeinu has just invented on his own. In fact, he's been dealing with this kind of sentiment for many years. There are people who are scared, they're afraid. So Moshe tells them, Lo siram, don't be afraid of them. Remember all the things that Hashem did to Paro, all the miracles that happened, and it's not just you fighting. God is going to send the hornets to destroy them before you even really get to them. Don't be afraid. God will destroy these people slowly, meaning we'll get rid of them as you move in, and that way the animals won't overtake you, and Hashem will give them over into your hands. Basically, it's a speech by Moshe Rabbeinu to inspire the Jewish people not to be afraid. Asks Zera Shimshon an interesting question. So, Kisoma Bilvavcha Rabbi Magayim Ha'ela. You'll say to yourself, there's so many of these Goyim. He says, Kasha, I find this very difficult. The Bekan Sol Kedaitach, the Yisrael Leos, Heim Ma'at Mikol Ha'amim. That here it sounds like the Jewish people felt like they were the smallest, they were the least of all the people. And yet, this is an interesting question, I haven't seen anyone phrase this question like this. But if you go back 10 psukim, it says as follows. Ki am kodesh ata Hashem elokach. You are a holy nation unto Hashem. Bachar Hashem elokecha lios lo la'am segul. I'm reading from the pasuk. It is you that Hashem has chosen to be His treasured nation. Mikol ha'amim asher al pnei adam, from amongst all the nations. And then Moshe gives an interesting statement to the Jewish people. Lo mirubchem mikol ha'amim chashak Hashem b'chem. Not because you are the largest of the nations that God desire you, vayivchar b'chem, and choose you, ki atem hama'at mikol ha'amim. In fact, you are all much less than, which, as the Zera Shimshon is going to point out, sounds like that the Jewish people were looking at their numbers and feeling pretty confident about their numbers. And Moshe has to tell them, don't get so excited about your numbers. The other nations have much more people. And then he says, and that's what you were quoting before, rather, ki me'aves Hashem eschem, Hashem loves you. U'mishamer es hashvua shenishbal avesechem, it's only because He's keeping the promise to your forefathers, that's why you've been chosen. So asks the Zera Shimshon, earlier in Pasuk Zayin, the Jewish people were convinced the other way. The Istrach Kral Meimar, that the verse has to say, Lo mirubchem mikol ha'amim, you are not the biggest. It sounds like the Jewish people were convinced that their numbers were big. So which one is it?
They came out of Egypt. There were many more Egyptians than.
Yeah, but they were thinking maybe they're going to the land of Canaan, and there were all these city-states, and there were all these that. Maybe they thought they had the numbers. At least that's what the pasuk sounds like it's saying. And Moshe tells them, you don't have the numbers, that's not it. And yet here, Moshe is speaking, and he's saying that the Jewish people felt like, how are they going to overcome these great numbers? So he sees it as a sort of contradiction in the verses.
But you don't have to see it that way. You can see it as setting up a discussion that really means, in spite of the fact that you don't have the greatest numbers. As people talk like that all the time. You want to set it up. It's not because of this, but rather because of that. And so,
Well, yeah, I understand, but he's learning that if Moshe has to say to them, your numbers aren't that great, it sounds like that the people felt that they were. So he says, now, some of you might jump to the following answer, which is natural. Ve'ein lomar, now don't say, the me'achar sheshamu sha'akadosh baruch hu amar lahem, ki atem ha'ma'at, azeschilu larim. Now don't say like this, which is what some people might suggest, which is that the Jewish people always thought that they were big in numbers. And then 10 psukim ago, when Moshe says to them, don't think that you have such great numbers. In fact, you're smaller than almost every other nation. At that point, they became afraid. And that's why Moshe has to give them the speech in this week's parsha, saying, don't worry, even though your numbers are low, you shouldn't be afraid. So then he says, if that's true, then it shouldn't be so much space between them. You can take up Sha'amar Lami Rubchem, then that's what he should have said earlier, when he said you aren't such big numbers.
During the spies, when the spies were saying that we can't defeat them.
Well, they didn't use numbers. They didn't use numbers. Yeah. So then that response should have been in proximity to the previous discussion. There shouldn't have been a whole nother topic of Moshe's speech, and then go back and say, by the way, it's not because you're. Don't worry. Don't be afraid of being small. Furthermore, why does it say kisomar bilvavcha? You will say in your hearts. Lama dafka bilvavcha. You know, in your hearts means that there's like this internal grumbling. The Jewish people don't grumble internally. Right? They express themselves.
That's for sure.
Right?
I don't know why you say that.
Yeah. I'm keeping my response inside.
Yeah, there you go.
Furthermore, first of all, and I think this is what some of the people were asking here, why would the Jewish people even think that they are a large number neged kala umos, against all the nations? The 70 nations, like, even if they can overcome one city, but they have to understand that all of the land of Israel, with all of its inhabitants, is going to be a lot more than 600,000 soldiers and or men, and the Jewish people are one nation, and they can all gang up, which is what they did. They didn't just fight one at a time. They formed groups, and they came to attack the Jewish people. And you look in the book of Yeshua, and Yeshua is fighting 5 and 6 at a time. So he wants to say, so you could try to say, and with difficulty, they were thinking that maybe together the nations outnumber us, but maybe individually we are the largest group. Hashem says, no, even if you count the nations separately, you're still even without that, you're still. So maybe you want to go there. He says, but I don't like this. He wants to suggest something a lot deeper. The Beperikam of the Avodah Zarah is a fascinating discussion in the Gemara, and as we mentioned a few weeks ago, that the greatness of the Zera Shimshon is that he wasn't just great in one area of the Torah, but he was great in all areas of the Torah. And here we see he's drawing on Talmudic principles to try to answer midrashic questions.
Is that kosher?
Yes. Okay. Well, only if you know your stuff. So if the Gutanai bebraisa, there's a disagreement in the Gemara. Iazlinan basar chachma v'abikiyus or basar harov. Who wins when you have a debate between a group of people who are wiser and more knowledgeable versus another group of people who are a majority? Who wins?
Majority.
Right? It's a debate in the Gemara. Perikama di Yavamas, and the Gemara in the beginning of Yavamas, Nami, my time in the Manda Amar, also Beis Shammai Kidivreim, Alpha Gav Dahabe Beis Hillel Ruba. The question that the Gemara deals with is, we know that the Beis Hillel was the majority, the Beis Shammai was the minority. So we know that we rule like Beis Hillel based on the majority. The question is, why did the school of Shammai not accept the rulings of Hillel and follow the majority? That's the question that the Gemara asks. And the Gemara answers the opinion, when do we follow the majority? Assuming that everyone is on the same level, people can compare to each other. But Beis Shammai, they were the sharper and wiser Torah scholars over Beis Hillel. So the Gemara suggests, according to one opinion, that Beis Shammai was not required to follow the teachings of Hillel because they were superior scholars. And the superior scholars, they don't have to bow to the majority, which is a fascinating concept.
But what makes superior to Hillel? What is superior?
Well, I mean, scholars can know if they're superior. Now, if people are in the same league, it's impossible to tell. You can't compare two people who are in the same league. But when people are just steps above and beyond the other ones, then it's easy to tell. You know, there's no rabbi who I've ever met in this country who can compare to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. You know, he's just a class of his own. So, you know, sometimes it's clear. So that's the point, that the students of Shammai were so much beyond the students of Hillel that they were entitled to not follow the majority.
Why wouldn't the Shammai, they're not heathens, they're going to recognize that someone knows better, so why wouldn't they change their opinion and follow the smarter guy and then change their vote? I mean, just because there's more of them doesn't mean they're smarter.
No, but they had their reasoning and their rationale, which they followed, and it didn't make sense to them what Shammai was saying, and so they had the majority. But the Shammai guys were smarter, and so they did understand what they were saying.
Isn't it a case where we can't overturn some of the rulings of previous generations because no matter how many rabbis we get nowadays, they're not considered at the level of the.
That's right. That's right.
Isn't there a Gemara though that says that the reason we follow Beit Hillel is not over the majority? It's because they learned what Beit Shammai said, and they actually said it first, and they were actually able to put their stuff in a context better than the other people. So they seem to be more.
That's a remez or a drush, but there's no halachic rationale like that. That we would rule like the person who's more considerate. That's more on the midrashic level. We would say that's why they merited that the halacha should be like them. But that's not a technical.
Given the wiliness of the Yetzer Hara, there's an enormous amount of room and opportunity when you say that one who is head and shoulders above another. I mean, if a person tries to judge themselves in this domain, there's an enormous room for going astray.
Yeah, but this was universally accepted. Everyone knew. The students of Shammai were the more advanced students. They were the more clever students. They were greater. And even of the students who we know, for example, Rabbi Eliezer, according to one opinion, was of the school of Shammai, while Rabbi Yeshua was of the school of Hillel, and Rabbi Eliezer was called Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol for a reason. Everyone accepted him to be wiser. It wasn't just that Beis Shammai was saying it; Beis Hillel accepted. Those are the more advanced guys, with just bigger numbers.
But what do they rather, the Beis Shammai say on the Pasuk about what do they do in this Pasuk?
Acher Rabim, when people are on the same level. That's what he just said.
Yeah, but the Torah doesn't make a distinction between.
So you have to know, you have to study the sources for how do we know what it's referring to.
So you want to translate that robe means robe knowledge.
No. We're not saying that. Acher Rabim Hatos is the majority in number. But you can't suggest that the psukim are literal only. There's place for interpretation. So we would have to ask the students of Shammai and say, where in the pasuk do they see a clue that it's referring to people who are on the same level? And I have no question they would be able to answer you. But our Gemara is based on the teachings of, the rulings of Hillel and the students which come from that. So there's nowhere in the Talmud where Beis Shammai is explaining to us what Achrei Rabbim, how they explain Achrei Rabbim Lahatos.
So at the time, you have Shammai able to follow their own rulings. We don't have to go to the majority. But as far as we're concerned, and the generations that came before us after, we follow his Hillel.
Right.
So we do follow.
Because we rule that the majority wins despite this situation. He's just quoting this opinion. And halachically, and this is where if you have a mind like a computer you can search through, and he goes through all of the Torah and says, and there's even a place where it might apply. For example, when it comes to a sick person eating on Yom Kippur, the Tur quotes the halacha, that there's an opinion that if a person is in the hospital and he has 3 or 4 doctors, and each one is giving a different opinion as to whether he's allowed to fast or not, so the Tur cites an opinion that we might not follow the majority of doctors, but we might follow the most qualified doctor.
That's a halacha.
Af neged harov shall rofim. Even when there's a majority of doctors who are saying otherwise, she'ein kol kach chachamim, if they are not as qualified, if they are not, let's say, the chairman of the board or something like that. So if they're just regular doctors, we would follow the expert on the matter, and so there, life and death, we're putting it in the hands of the more qualified rather than the majority. So
Still not halacha, that's fact. Those are science. You go after.
but the halacha follows
No, I understand, but between the doctors, you're going after the smartest guy. But when it's halacha, Rabbi is different.
Well, maybe not.
Torah scholars are specialists. The doctor of Torah. What are you talking
No,
about?
because they get from Hashem, they get Ruach Kodesh, they get help from above. Doctor, medicine is science. The more you know, the better you are, and the better.
No, but here we're talking about why Hashem chooses the Jewish people. So it's kind of in between both those cases. One could argue to separate, but again, what he's showing you is that there is this concept of expertise over majority. V'zu ha'isesvaris Yisrael, so he says, that's what the Jewish people are thinking. She'av b'sha'umos emarov, even though the nations are, of course, more than them, im kol ze'oso arov and enachshav l'klom, but it's not about majority in numbers. Adarab Yisrael niku arov, the Jewish people should be considered the majority, or the greater people, ha'im shem yoser chachamim me'am k'dechsev, because they, the Jewish people, are a smarter people. We're not just claiming this, but Moshe Rabbeinu had just said this in last week's parsha. It says, "Ki hi chachmaschem ubinaschem la'enei ha'amim." That this is your wisdom and your understanding. In other words, the world knows that because we have the Torah, because of that, we are greater and wiser, and they think of us as smart people. And in fact, the pasuk continues, and the nations say, "Rak am chacham v'navon hagoy hagadol hazeh." In other words, they look at us as if we are a majority, a bigger number, as if we're more qualified to speak because they see us as wiser and greater. And so the Jewish people are thinking that maybe that's why Hashem chooses them, because they are the smarter people. They are. But the question is whether that's why Hashem chooses them.
I mean, it's never been more obvious.
So V'akadosh Baruch Hu Heishiv Lahem, Hashem says to them, that's not the case. Sha'adin Einu Kach, that's actually not the halacha. Ela Adarabba Azina Basar Harov Mamash, we do follow, when it comes to Torah scholars, we do follow the majority. We do follow Beis Hillel. O Lepachas Nishar Adavar B'Safek Moshakasu Aposkim, or at best, it becomes equal, the majority versus the expertise. And that's why Hashem says to them, Lo merubchem mikol ha'amim. Stop thinking of yourself that Hashem chooses you because you're somehow better than the nations. She'adarab atem ha'ma'at mikol ha'amim. You're the minority and you're not as special as the rest of the nations. V'atam shebacharti bachem. So then why did I choose you? Below bahem, not the other nations. U'bipnei she'atem krovim li. It's because you are related to me. K'dichsiv, it says, Livnei Yisrael Am Karovo. This is in Tehillim 148, but you say this every day in Psukei de Zimra, and people run over these 4 words and don't realize what they're saying. Livnei Yisrael Am Karovo. We are the Jewish people. Am Karovo, the people close to Hashem, related to Him. And the rule is, V'rov v'karov, halach achar karov. If you have a situation where you have to choose between the majority or the relatives come first. V'im lo sishmu b'koli, however, there's a danger here. Because if you don't follow the word of Hashem, lo tiyu ot krovim li, you will no longer be close to me. Then God has to follow the majority, meaning, an incredible idea. Exile is not just a punishment, but as long as we are following the mitzvahs, we have the right to be the chosen people. When we don't follow the mitzvahs and we distance ourselves from Hashem, it's not just we get punished, we've lost our ticket to that kind of protection, because we are in fact the least worthy of all the nations without the Torah.
So how about how we are related? What's
So he doesn't exactly define that, but he's saying that Hashem calls us Am Karovo. So we are.
Why even say relatives? Why don't you just say that we're close to Hashem?
Well, what does close mean?
But relatives implies some kind of genetic...
That's what he's saying. Whatever the equivalent, we are like adopted children of Hashem.
That we are Bechori, right?
Right, B'ni Bechori. But that's what he's saying. He's saying we're like.
because of the Torah. Otherwise,
Well, that's
we're
what he's
not.
saying, right? The
It's
Garcinim,
not
but
genetic that no matter what, we're close to him. We're close to him because as long as we keep the Torah. So maybe like the marriage contract, as long as we keep the ketubah intact, we're
Right.
close to him, and if not, no.
right. So you
What
call.
relatives he's talking about?
Well, he's trying to give it that status, right? The Garcinim Baba Basra, the Gemara Baba Basra says, Amar Reb Chanina, Rov v'karov, holchen achar rov. If you have a majority and you have relatives, you follow the majority. V'afagav deruba de'oraisa v'kurba de'oraisa. Even though majority is a biblical concept and relation is a biblical concept, afilahachi ruba adif, still the majority wins. Masir Reb Zera v'kasu atoysa v'zel l'shono. The Reb Chanina azina basaruba, meaning Reb Chanina argues that you follow the majority. Afagav the ikakurva, even if there's a relative. The muchach, which is obvious, Rav Paligal and Rav disagrees. But the ikakurva, the muchach, azabasakurva, where there is an apparent relative, you would follow the relative. And therefore, we would follow the opinion of Rav. So he says that's why the verse continues. Rather, it is because Hashem loves you. For you are a holy people to Hashem. Hashem chose you to be a chosen nation. Because you are close to me or relatives to me. Because of this, I will love you. I will bless you. And I will increase you. You will be more blessed than any nation. However,
What do you do with the pasuk that says, not because Hashem loved you because you're a chosen nation. Hashem loves you because of Abraham and Sarah.
no, but that pasuk says rather ki ma'avat Hashem etchem u'mishamro et hashvu ashnish b'lavoteichem.
But what do you do with the other pasuk that says Hashem chose you because Abraham and Sarah?
It says then in this pasuk too. It says that because of the shvur that he made to your forefathers. But he's saying that because of that, it turns into Ava.
Hashem did not like the Jews because the only thing that Hashem loved the Jews because of Abraham and Sarah.
Well, we're
That's
children
true.
of them, so
That's still a love.
we're their children.
Fine, but still.
That's what he's working with. That's what he's going with. That however you explain the source of that love, but Hashem does love the Jewish people.
Hashem was close to Jews not because they.
You're just going back to the source. But the pasuk is telling us that because of the shua with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because of that, Hashem loves the Jewish people. So now he's saying if Hashem loves the Jewish people, that makes them the kurva.
Is there some aspect of the neshama that Jews have a Jewish neshama which is attached to Hashem? Is that somewhat of the familial relationship?
I
How do you distinguish?
I think so. He doesn't go there, but I think absolutely that you would say the neshama, which is chelik al ma'u, would explain what that relation is. Like we are, it doesn't come from the same place.
But still, this Hashem is the one.
Yeah, but it doesn't come from the same place. That could be the difference in what's called karov and not karov.
Right.
It's from a lower place. It doesn't come from.
Different places of Shekhinah, that's closer or not.
No, this is from the Kisei HaKavod, the neshamot of the Jewish people.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's
what I'm saying.
right.
That's
That's a different level. He says, however, he disagrees halachically. But that's not the halacha. The Kalman on rov v'karav halacha achar arov v'filu b'kurva the muchach. In the end, the halacha follows. We follow the majority. Which means, according to our own halacha, according to the Torah, God should have chosen the biggest nation. Should have chosen the Chinese.
Isn't there an aspect of acceptance? When you have a majority of rabbis say one thing halachically, then the community accepts that.
Right.
Whereas God doesn't have to accept.
God follows the Torah. God follows the laws of the Torah. That's what the Medrash tells us.
More connected to
Because Torah is the truth. Everything has to work according to the Torah. That's what he's saying. He's saying according to the halacha, God should continue to choose whoever's the biggest nation. In fact,
to follow halachas too.
right? In fact, that's actually what these nations are arguing. There's two other religions who claim that God rejected us and took them, and they use as their greatest source of proof their rapid increase in growth. Because the fact that God supports them to grow, that's a proof that they are accepted and wanted. So what do we do with that? L'chein amar hakasuv. So that's what the pasuk in our parsha comes to tell us. Pentoma b'lvavcha, you'll say in your heart, k'sha'alev yavin b'machlokas anal. That's why it's in your heart. Meaning if you understand, you'll think that God isn't promising the Jewish people to keep them eternally. If God would turn to this other nation, he would have 1 billion adherents instead of 15 million. That's why you'll be afraid of the other nations, when you'll see their size. So Moshe says to the Jewish people of Zera, don't be afraid of them. It's not just because of who you are right now. There's something more going on. Remember, Hamasas Hagadolas, the great trials. The Isa Shamim Yeshla Yehudim Shchuna Levadim She'erin Derech Hagayim Afsikasam Holchem Acharov HaShchuna. The halacha is that if the Jewish people live in their own community and there's no path through it, no public thoroughfare through that path, then the halacha is that we follow the majority of that neighborhood when it comes to minhagim. Now, with avoiding all the complexities, you have to look up the halacha and Shulchan Aruch and all that. Because of ataz v'ashach, the alfagav the rov v'kar of hochanach or rov afilu b'kuver the muchach, even though we follow the majority. Shani hachashamur to move the b'fnei atzmo. Whenever you have a minority that remains distinct, it doesn't become nullified to the majority. And say that again. The halacha says that when you have a group which has a minority in it that does one way and a majority that does another way, then the halacha is that the minority has to follow the ways of the majority.
Unless.
What?
Unless.
But if that minority really makes itself distinct and separate, in a way where it's clear that they are a unit to themselves, they are seen as one whole unit and are not considered a minority to the rest.
It's like basar b'challah.
What?
It's also true by basar b'challah.
That what?
That if you have a big piece of meat which is not kosher, even though you have 60 against it.
Right. Very good. That's a great example. That's beautiful. There's a concept of chaticha aruya lehischabed in halacha, which says that if you have milk falls into meat, if it's 60, it's bottle, it's nullified. The halacha is that anything which is considered a significant enough piece of food that you could serve it as a serving. So, for example, if let's say chas v'shalom, you would have one cheeseburger got mixed into 1,000 burger buddies,
God forbid.
Right? Chas v'shalom. So if that would happen, it would not be batal, because it's an entire hamburger, and that's chaticha ru'el eschabed, which you're saying is the same idea. Once something is unique and distinct and special, it can't become nullified.
So if the relatives who are related to Hashem are one and united in the
Well,
Torah,
that's where he's going to go.
that's what I wondered. So that strengthens them to be stronger, even though they're smaller in number.
That's what he's going to say. Let's see that inside.
So going back,
What?
if you have a nice piece of meat, a big piece of meat that you could recognize that piece of meat falls into milk, and even the milk is 60 times, the milk is dark.
Everything's straight. It can't be.
Even though the milk is 60
רק אם
times.
המילק נשכח בזה של הבשר
Right.
בטבעו.
Because a chaticha haruya lischabed. Now, of course, we have debates amongst the rabbis. What's called chaticha lischabed? What's called a piece of meat that's deserving to be served? This kind of it depends which restaurant it comes from. Yeah, the way it works. But
How much it costs?
right, no, Hafsid Meruba is also taken into consideration. But yeah, it wouldn't become batal, and that's what he's saying. Chanami, that's what the pasuk is saying. Lo sir, man, don't be afraid.
Shammai kept their own because they were a group.
Maybe they
that
held themselves to be
Shammai.
distinct. Maybe. Zachar Tiskar. The question is, you have to really make them distinct, though. Zachar Tiskar is asher asel aparo amasas agadolos. The hainu kishehischal hakadosh baruch hu livchor bechem. When Hashem went to choose you, haisil lachem shchuna b'fnei atzma. He shows up in Egypt, and you were all living in your own community. But Yisa muvdalim and Amitzrayim. You know how they say they didn't change their clothing, they didn't change their language, they didn't change their names? So he's saying it's not just something special. Without that, the Jewish people are nullified to the Egyptians. And God halachically has no right to choose the Jewish people. And only because they are living in their own community, with their own identity, he says this is the biggest miracle in all of Egypt. Bigger miracle than frogs jumping out of this bigger frog, bigger miracle than the entire land being covered in a thick fog of darkness. A bigger miracle than that is God shows up in Egypt to redeem the Jewish people, and after hundreds of years in Egypt, they are distinct and separate and unique and excelling.
That's the only thing they are. They're not keeping anything.
Nothing. That's right. Shebamakom b'nei Yisrael la'barsham k'chsiv rak be'eretz Goshen asher sham b'nei Yisrael lo haya barad. In the place where the Jewish people were, there was no hail. V'fleisi bayomu eretz Goshen, and everyone saw it, that Goshen is its own distinct place. M'shemachi kodem lo mirubcham amakar ki am kadosh ata. That's why it uses the word. Why did God choose you? Because you are a holy people. What do you mean? They weren't holy before, but what does the word kadosh really mean? Separate. The mashma moved over which means separate.
Moshe said the big thing was, this was a tremendous nace because it's goy mikerav goy. Right?
Oh, so there's still a goy mikerav goy, because it's still like a baby coming out of the mother's womb, but the baby is still distinct, even though it's completely right. It's completely surrounded by. So he says, "V'cheinu ha'emes she Yisrael muvdalim maseim mikol ha'amim," that the Jewish people are in fact separated from all the nations in their actions. So that does make the Jewish people distinct. So it's interesting because he's breaking down halachically why the Jewish people are the chosen people, and in the end he comes down to the Jewish people are the chosen people because we have all our unique qualities, but only because we are distinct, and we are, let's go use Rabbi Yamin's term, we are a chaticha haruya li'eschabed. We, the Jewish people, are a hamburger that's completely distinct.
Surrounded by cheeseburgers.
Right.
Excellent.
You can't get it out of your mind.
A Jew burger.
Yeah, Jew burger.
Maybe there's so many Jews that have a last name Burger. I don't know. Okay, so I know I've just a few minutes left. I just want to sneak in a little bit of the next Torah. We're not going to do the whole thing, but it's just, this is great because he doesn't often do this, but sometimes he'll quote a medrash pliya, like this strange medrash, and even if you don't take his explanation, it's just such a great medrash, and to see him sort of struggle to try to figure it out. So the bottom of page Shin Yud Zayin, he quotes a medrash Avkir, which says, Vayancha vayarivecha. God starved you, God pained you, and God starved you. Vayachilcha es haman, and He gave you the man. Mikan remez ladlakas neris Shabbos. This is the allusion in the Torah that we're supposed to light Shabbos candles. Good luck. And this is the point of these midrashim.
What's a burning issue?
Enlighten us,
Very
Rabbi,
nice.
go ahead.
Okay. So we don't have time for the whole thing. I'm just going to read very quickly the bottom of page Shin Yud Ches on the next page. V'od b'derech acher, his second explanation. The Isur b'mafarshim atan. Okay, I'm just going to say it outside. The reason that Hashem gave the Jewish people the man, derech inui v'ra'avon, in a way of pain and starvation. So he says because the man was a spiritual food and not a physical food. And technically, your body should not be able to benefit from spiritual food. Like you say, Moshe Rabbeinu was up in the mountain. So how did his body survive? Because he was living off the light of Hashem. But that's only because Moshe achieved the level where the physical, otherwise the body would disintegrate without food. Right? So he says, the physical benefit here, the Jewish people are eating the man, how could they survive for 40 years this way? So he says, what Hashem did was that He caused them, that the man should become a little bit physical, enough to sustain them, but it felt insubstantial, and that's why they're complaining, because they're being sustained and they're surviving, but they're not quite getting that feeling like they're being physically sustained. So it kind of answers the question for why they're complaining. He says, "Masha ochlen b'Shabbos umazon gufni v'chashuv lanu komen mazon ruchni." He says, Shabbos we eat physical food, but it's actually considered spiritual food. And he quotes a Reishis Chachma who says that whatever you eat on Shabbos will not rot after death. He says, "Basav Hashuman HaMisrabe ba'adam b'shvil achilas Shabbos v'yamtu eino napach l'rima v'telea," won't turn into worms and maggots. So he says, "Minadinu shetzarich la'ochla b'li inu v'ravon," which means by Shabbos we're supposed to eat that food without any pain and difficulty. And he quotes the Gemara that a person doesn't really enjoy their food unless they can see it.
That's why we light candles.
So on Shabbos, we light Friday night. We light candles. In those days, that was the only light they had. Even though otherwise we would just eat in darkness and we'd use a little bit of the light that's still left outside and try to eat early in the night. Friday night, everyone has to have candles on the table. Which is what they did in those days, on the table. Today, some people don't put it on the table because we technically have electric lights. But in days when they didn't, the candles had to be on the table so that you can see your food in order that Shabbos should allow the greatest level of sustenance. So he just finishes there. He says, in Shabbos we say, Ein Kiddush ala b'makom suda, because the food of Shabbos has Kedusha and spirituality. So when you make Kiddush before you eat, the Kiddush infuses your food with the spiritual aspect that we're looking for to be sustained spiritually. And it says that's why it's called Kiddush, based on the pasuk Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, should be called Zechira. But it's called Kiddush because when you make Kiddush before you eat, that takes the food and turns all the food which is waiting to be served into something spiritual. And that's why the Medrash says that because you were starving and you were eating the man, because you, and I left out this part, I should mention, it's really the key. He says that even though they had any taste they wanted, but because they couldn't see that food, it didn't quite have the same effect, which is why on Shabbos we light candles so we can have that effect. Presentation is it. All right.